So let's start with Labour. Looking back at all of our written coverage, our podcasts, our videos, everything that we've done over the past year, one topic really stands out from the rest, and that is that Labour is in a very difficult uphill battle that it is not winning. In January, the IFG, the think tank, wrote that 2025 will be the make or break year for the new Labour government. Would you say it's been more of a make or more of a break?
Is that a question? Is that a real question? Look at our coverage. No, it's gone brilliantly. Everything's great. Everything's fine. The story, I think, of 2025 has been just the drip, drip, drip deterioration further. It sort of started getting to a point going into the summer where it felt like maybe every 2 weeks there was a new challenge or mini crisis, and then we had the summer, and then from September it felt like it was maybe up to like one a week or even two a week. It sort of sped up a little bit, snowballed. We've now got the Labour Party polling at around 18%, so only 2 above the Green Party. You've got Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves having the lowest popularity ratings of, I think, any Prime Minister and Chancellor ever.
Sort of the least trusted party in Britain, which was some exclusive polling that we got hold of as well.
Yeah. So I don't think you can answer that question with anything other than it's continued to damage them, and looking into 2026, it is difficult to see how they recover and things get better. But now Tom is going to give us the optimistic view.
I wish I could. No, that's right. I'm continually astounded at how bad it is. I think the big question that we have when we're trying to assess the Labour government is whether it is recoverable, whether the country has just not made its mind up, and there's no and whether that might be completely unfair, that might be too much of an extreme position. Maybe we're too volatile as a country now. Maybe there are sort of deeper things going on here. Social media, whatever it may be, that we just swing wildly now between majorities and who's in favour and who's not in favour. But it's really difficult for me to not look at the polls and look at all interactions that you see now on social media or in the comments section. Or if you go to Keir Starmer's TikTok video and open the comments and read them, and they are astonishing in their sort of vitriol. And they're the same things that come out. Are you going to tax me for watching this TikTok video? Are you going to arrest me for this comment? You know, that sense that that they've just made up their minds, they hate him, and they're never going to change their opinion. And if that is true, then my big worry is that it's not just bad for the Labour Party, but it's kind of, existential in that sort of Scottish collapse type way.
Yeah, and to be honest, Tom, that stuff that you see online is very much reflected in reality. Like for my column, I often go and visit different parts of the country, and I might not be asking people specifically about Keir Starmer's leadership, but he will come up. And, the range of emotions basically range from, at best, laughing about him, and at worst, being really quite angry about what they feel he's doing that's letting the country down. Yeah. So I think it's that sense of anger and betrayal is really visceral in the country, and you're seeing that probably through a more extreme or amplified lens on social media.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, again, it comes back to this question, whether is that the case with all politicians now? Rachel and I have been in the lobby for, well, let's not say how long we've been in the lobby for.
Some years.
But we've seen it happen. I've seen people, I remember vividly Theresa May after Grenfell just looking completely broken, and that a sense of just, just moral political collapse. And I had this worry that, we were sort of pinning all of the blame for this appalling atrocity onto this one woman.
Yes.
It was like she was the scapegoat.
Danger. Yeah.
And that we sort of have done that almost with every prime minister since. They're all broken by that job. None of them can emerge having succeeded. And so the question is it possible to succeed? I just think that is a bit too fair on the failures, and that the part of the problem with this government is it's made some really big mistakes, but it also just has no sense of like urgency, that there's like a crisis, and that it needs to just grip it and act very, very, very quickly on something, anything. Just show us that something can be done super quickly and that you care so much that it's an emergency.
Yes, a tangible change that you can bring into people's lives, that they think, okay, the government can control things. I think that's one theme of this year and previous years, is the disorientation that you feel as a citizen, that the government just doesn't seem to be able to change things that are going wrong, from small boats to sewage in our rivers. Why can't the government stop that from happening?
Crisis.
I mean, I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, to the pile of rubbish.
The pile of rubbish that
Oxfordshire, that
our
Will Dunn,
bold correspondent Will
Yes.
Dunn went to go and
Intrepid.
wade through. But one theory obviously does go that if Labour changes its leader, then things might look up for it in terms of its reputation. And Tom, you were sort of instrumental in this kind of narrative when you interviewed Andy Burnham just before Labour conference. Take us back to that time and give us a little overview of how you feel about the potential for a new Labour leader potentially to change Labour's fortunes.
Yeah. So I think, again, it's the question that Labour MPs will be thinking about over Christmas holidays, which is, has it reached a point where Keir Starmer cannot continue? And what will happen if you replace him? And I know that when you speak to Labour cabinet ministers who are contemplating standing themselves, they will say that the danger of this is that we just look like the Tories again.
Yeah.
That we're replacing with that. We were supposed to be the change party that brought stability back to British politics. Stability being change after all the years that it happened. And then I think most of them have reached this conclusion now that there is no choice, that you have to change. Now, obviously, I interviewed Andy Burnham ahead of the Labour conference in September, October time. I think he was like first out the traps, in a sense, of saying to us, if you want me, I'm here. I'm not getting on my horse and charging down from the north with my army behind me. But if you make the call, I'll come. I'm interested. And I think what was interesting about what he was saying, not only that, putting his hand up, but also saying we need a dramatic change in policy. And he set it out, and it was quite radical in a sense. And as he put it, it's essentially reversing Thatcherism. That's what he wants to do. So it's a much bigger change. And if you think back to the interview I did with Keir Starmer, my first issue for the New Statesman in June, he is saying something very different, which is that this country is not broken, that it is fixable, that if we bring some stability back, some sensible governance, then things will improve. They are completely two different visions completely. And that, I think, is at the essence of what's going on here. The Labour Party is starting to conclude that something much more radical has to happen.
Yeah, I think that would be the big Labour story of 2025 actually probably isn't just the general fall in popularity. It's specifically the dawning realisation on Labour MPs, high-profile Labour figures, that the man who won them a historic victory in 2024 is has to go before the next Parliament. And I share Tom's concern that for voters that looks chaotic. One of the reasons that voters who actually were quite ideologically aligned with the Conservatives still abandoned them at the last election was because there was a sense that they were just too involved in the psychodrama, too involved in the backstabbing, who's going to lead them next. They weren't actually focused on governing because it was all personalities. And if you replicate that, you just turbocharge the sense that none of the parties are really in control of everything. But I still think that over the course of this year, it's gone from will he lead them into the next election to are they going to get rid of him in January? Are they going to get rid of him in May? Are they going to get rid of him in October? Like, it's become a when rather than an if. And it's being openly talked about across the party, kind of the left-wingers and the not-so-left-wingers. It's this growing consensus. And that, I think, really started in earnest round about September, October time with the departure of Angela Rayner, and then immediately afterwards the departure of Peter Mandelson, even under very, very different circumstances. But just suddenly it was, OK, this has now fallen apart, and now we start to think about the next steps. And that has been a real shift just in how they think of Starmer as a leader.
Yeah, I remember that week in politics because I was on the Eurostar with Nick Thomas-Symonds, the EU Relations Minister, and I'd had to sort of wobble along the carriage in order to get to first class to go and do my interview. And because, they give out the newspapers, every paper that I saw, the front page was, Keir Starmer gone by Christmas, Keir Starmer gone by May, because of these resignations and the chaos at the top of government. Someone had just left number 10 as well, a very respected, long-standing advisor. And so it did really feel like that was the moment where the government suddenly felt like it was in crisis and something would have to change. And Ben Walker, our senior data journalist, and I go through the different prospects for the leadership election candidates in our Look Ahead podcast, which will be out later in the week. So we won't go through all of the different options. And of course, we've got the May elections coming up next year as well, which is seen as the most likely trigger point for this election. We go through what could happen in those elections as well. So listen out for that episode. But let's move on, because we've got a lot of stories to get to the rise of the right. Reform, obviously, has been the story of the year. Nigel Farage has become the main opposition figure in UK politics. What's happened, Tom? How has he done this?
That is the $1 million question, isn't it? I guess. I think you cannot answer that question without talking about immigration, of course. I mean, the number of times when you go back through Farage's career when he sort of says, I'm out, I'm done. If you think back to the days after the 2016 referendum, you think back to 2019 when Boris Johnson won his majority to, in quotes, get Brexit done. And both times there was a suggestion that was Farage had achieved what he wanted to achieve. Remember, there was a pact between Farage and Boris Johnson to get through that 2019 election. So there's a lot of talk, isn't there, at the moment about, will there, won't be. I mean, he has done it before. So we should bear that in mind. When it's in his interest to do so, he will do so. It is this extraordinary thing that if you look back over the decades, and there's an immigration specialist that I spoke to, an academic who talked about the 1970s through to the sort of 90s as being a period of zero immigration. In sort of quotes, and this means net zero immigration. So essentially, these were the years of Auf Wiedersehen, Pet, and all of that. So we had Brits leaving and we had people coming in. So it wasn't neutral, but it sort of balanced itself out. From the early 90s, that starts to change. And it starts to change because we're entering into this sort of globalized world. The fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of China, the rise of other countries being able to produce things, and the kind of coming together of that world, prosperity, and the British economy starting to do well. And from that point on, we start to see immigration rising. It goes up to sort of 40, 50,000 in the 90s. And jumps up into the hundreds of thousands after that under Tony Blair, 200,000. Then at the eve of the Brexit referendum, it's at about 300,000. I think it touches 330,000. And of course, this is a major part of the Brexit referendum. But then after the pandemic and after Brexit, it jumps up to 700,000. Imagine a world in which that hadn't happened. And the remarkable thing is, of course, this is Boris Johnson. This is Boris Johnson's doing. There's sort of the chaos in government, the complete lack of grip, the chaos in his personal and public life kind of feeds through into policy and combining with the pandemic. And I just think that is the fundamental challenge right now, isn't it? And this is what you see what you hear when you speak to Keir Starmer and those around him. They understand perfectly well that the only way that they're going to stop the next election being on migration is if they find a way to suggest to the public that they've got a control over it, as you were saying earlier, Anoosh, that sense that they've done something. But it's whether they can do that without amplifying the issue. Because if they amplify the issue in a way that it becomes the be-all and end-all of British politics, then they will lose. So they have to somehow deal with it without amplifying it, and then move it on to subjects in which the public are with the government on, so NHS or other questions. That's the great challenge for this government.
Yeah, that was the idea of Shabana Mahmood's plans, wasn't it? We do this now, and then we can talk about something else.
Yes.
It's optimistic, isn't it?
You said we needed to be optimistic.
Yeah.
You gave me that challenge.
There you go, Rachel. But another story, of course, of reform is that it has essentially replaced the Conservative Party as the opposition or the right-wing opposition. How have they managed to do that? What are the dynamics at play there, Rachel?
So this is really interesting, and I think it feeds into the previous topic about why has Labour
the chaos
fallen
of
in
the Tories.
I think it's all linked, because both the Conservatives and Labour were operating in this universe where if Labour's doing well, the Conservatives are doing badly, if the vice versa, and so you can kind of track where you are by where the other party is. So Labour, after the election, when the Conservatives are really unpopular for all of the reasons that Tom has outlined and many, many more, therefore we've got some time before people start to think we're unpopular, because thinking we're unpopular relies on the Conservatives building up their credibility, and that takes time. And what they didn't predict was the emergence of a third option where people who didn't like the Conservatives could go, I don't like Labour either, here's Nigel Farage offering something new. I think the similar thing has been happening actually with the Conservatives. They thought they would have more time to recover because they thought it would take some time before the popularity of the new Labour government wore off, and by the time people were starting to get a bit sick of Labour and casting around for alternatives, they'd be in a better place. That's normally how parties recover after big election defeats, and both of them were proved massively wrong. It turns out they can both be really unpopular. I think they're both on 18% at the moment, and if you think about the combined popularity of the two main parties is, hang on, let me do some maths. That's 36%, right? So like they're barely at 40%, and that's the total of the two mainstream parties. And if you look at what happened in the May local elections, you see this continuation of the fracturing of the vote in different directions. It was the first election where 5 parties, including the Greens, got above 10% each. First time when the leading party wasn't Labour or the Conservatives. And that fragmentation is something that Nigel Farage has done very well out of. Both Labour and the Conservatives have struggled to adapt to it. And now in the latter half of the year, you've seen Zach Polanski and the Greens take advantage of that as well, take advantage of the fact that voters are casting around for not one of you two, what are the rest of my options. But that goes against decades, like a century of political thought about what happens in elections. And it's not surprising that they're all a bit, how do we deal with this?
Yeah, because even though Labour won that landslide, it was a bit of a loveless landslide, wasn't it? And you did see Reform coming a strong second place in a lot of those seats. And so already you saw that, I know that it was a majority, it was a landslide, but already you started seeing the fracturing of that two-party system in the general election. And that's only been precipitated since then.
Yeah, there's a piece I write in this week's magazine where I reflect on a message a friend of mine had sent to me, who had previously worked in Number 10. And it was the day after the election, and he sent this message to me saying something along the lines, he's finished. And I said, sorry, what do you mean he's finished? Yeah. And I said, what do you mean? He's just won a historic landslide. Come on, you're being completely absurd. He's like, well, no, you can't. If you cannot win in under these circumstances more than 33% of the vote, then there's like a fundamental problem. And as you say, Anoosh, there's all these. The fact that Reform are in second place, Rachel probably knows the numbers, in like 90 seats in the north of England, is seismic. There's an interesting kind of almost like a sort of Marxist analysis would say, this is actually something that weirdly Tony Blair sort of argues, not the world's most prominent Marxist, but he says essentially the party system that we know, the Labour-Tory party system, came into being after the Industrial Revolution. It's a reflection of the economic conditions. Yeah. And what we are going through is a complete change in the global economy. We are moving into some different world. And what is that world? It's some kind of globalized digital world that's then starting to break apart under Trump and Xi and Putin and all the rest. But essentially, the old models don't work anymore. And so we're getting new parties, naturally, that reflect this new world with its sort of new challenges. And the old parties will either adapt to that and change, or they'll break apart and they will become, Asquith's Liberals or whatever it is. And, the Labour Party, the Reform will do to the Labour Party as Labour did to the Liberals, or something like that. The Greens perhaps will do to Labour what Labour did to the Liberals.
Yeah, and it's a lot more painful for mainstream parties under a first-past-the-post system because they are already coalitions of different groups. Yeah, okay. And beyond reform, obviously, we've seen the rise of more of the street right, haven't we? We've seen anti-immigration protests outside asylum hotels, Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom march, which was a record turnout for that element of the right in September. That's concerning to some people who feel that there has also been an accompanying rise of open racism, and some of the stats bear that out. Tom, do you think this kind of strand of right-wing sort of backlash is going to continue?
Yeah, Freddie Hayward's really good on this, isn't he? Because he was talking about the US, and his kind of he comes back, and whenever you speak to him, he's so startled by how radical the right are in the United States. And he keeps saying, I try to tell people here that Trump is a moderate in the United States. And there's this sort of radical wing. And in his piece about Farage, in this week's magazine, he talks about people to Farage's right, like Raheem Kassam, who are saying to him in these Manhattan restaurants, you should go easy on Tommy. Let Tommy be Tommy. Yeah. And they're coming to blows. They're almost coming to physical blows over this because Farage has always kept Tommy Robinson out of whatever party he has had, UKIP and Brexit Party and all the rest. But it's there. And as you say, you've dealt with it, you've covered it more than I have. It's like it's there. It's a part of our society now, more open part of a society than I can remember for a long time. It's expressed in that march. But also, all of us live in London. It doesn't take long, does it? When you drive out, the flags start emerging.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that. I don't think that is indicating support for the far right in any sense. But I think it's quite instructive for those of us who live in London that the lack of flags here is not the normal in this country. The normal is flags everywhere now.
Yeah.
And I think they were a big part of the rally. And I've heard a lot of frustration within the cabinet as well about the response from the government to that rally.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that sense of they didn't know what to do. One cabinet minister I spoke to the other day said, we should have been out there aggressively denouncing it and saying, that's our flag, get off it, and then they should have ordered every council building in the country to fly the Union flag, and they should have gone up in every school, and that was the way, like you reclaim it. And others obviously who take a different view. I don't have the answer, but it's interesting that there is a deep frustration with the government's kind of almost like rabbit in the headlights kind of approach.
Yeah, Rachel, well, what do you think? How has the government responded to this rise of the slightly harder-edged?
Well, they can't decide, can they? They can't decide if the message is kind of full-throated rejection or if it's we understand the concerns but obviously condemn the violence and the thuggery. And you had at Labour Party conference, I think they thought that they had a dividing line with Reform, obviously, which is not the party of this, but specifically a couple of weeks before Reform had come out with its scrapping indefinite leave to remain, even if people who had it, and they were kind of like, okay, this is the line, we can go down on that line, and it feels like the debate is so much bigger than that particular policy. It feels like the strength of feeling on the right and to the right of Reform, where openly there are conversations going on about remigration, about deporting of people who have lived here legally for years. There are conversations going on about whether people who were born here and have always lived here can fully be British, conversations about whether Rishi Sunak can be British, whether Kemi Badenoch can be British. These are conversations that you would not have had in public, at least, maybe anonymously online, 5 years ago. And they're happening, and that strength of feeling is there, and the government response is policy-based and feels much more muted than the strength of feeling.
Well, I think it was almost positive, wasn't it? I rember in that same interview with the minister, which took place about a week after that march, he said something about it being part of the proud British tradition of free speech. The line changed after that. But, you know, someone like Wes Streeting came out in a TV interview and had a completely different line on it, where he sort of used more of the language that you were talking about, Tom, and kind of drew a line in terms of these are our values and they don't stand for us kind of position. So there's definitely an uneasiness. There's definitely a lack of confidence there from the government in terms of these things.
I think there's also,
obviously, because the hotels policy is basically impossible to fix in any good time.
I think there's backlash to it as well, though, and that hasn't really been captured in the political conversation.
Yeah.
But if you look at polling about, say, Nigel Farage personally, he is a polarising figure. There are pretty much as many people, more people who dislike him and don't want to see him as Prime Minister than who do. There was interesting More in Common polling the end of last month that was about who would people vote against if they had to. So you are seeing the anti-reform, the anti-far right backlash manifesting in different ways. It's just not manifesting within the Labour government in that way. And I think sort of understanding that, to go back to the fragmentation, that the party that's the most popular out of 5 to 6 parties is not necessarily representative of what the country actually wants. And we don't really know how to measure that yet. And I think it's going to come out in really interesting ways in next year when it doesn't look like it's going back together anytime soon. Yeah,
which is why Nigel Farage does quite a careful job of keeping that distance from the Tommy Robinsons
he lost an MP
of
over
this
it.
world. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just interested in what you said, Anoosh, there about sort of the asylum hotel things basically being impossible to fix in any short time. I mean, doesn't that come back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, which is that sense that the government can't do anything in a short period of time? You know, it can't build the runway at Heathrow or not build the runway at Heathrow. It can't make a decision on that. I think we've been talking about our entire adult lives, right? It can't build any roads. It can't
20
build
years.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it can't.
The 1.5 million housing target. When you mention that to civil servants in the department, they laugh.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, right? Everyone now. But this is like obviously a ridiculous position to be in as a country.
It is.
So we can do things, and I do wonder whether this it plays on the public's mind somehow in their subconscious that they have lived through periods where we can do things.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can nationalise the entire banking industry in one go and continue to pay them their bonuses while we after we've done that for a long period of time. We can shut down the entire economy and order everyone to go into their homes and then take over their salaries, pay them, and then do a vaccine task force and have those Nightingales hotels. We can do all of that.
We can end rough sleeping overnight.
Yes.
Did that then as well.
Remember that was like an amazing moment. And yet we can't do anything on these other things. I think it is playing into that sense that this is no longer acceptable. That, you know, why can't we have that sense of emergency again? Okay, so you can't, the rape trials thing, you know, I think with the three of us were talking about before we came on air, and that lying behind this move to get rid of jury trials for some. So we can say right or wrong, you know, or a temporary measure, long permanent measure, but that sense of, okay, there's this crisis here. We cannot carry on as a country with women who have been raped waiting 5 years until they have their trial. That's absolutely outrageous. Yeah. And there should be an emergency measure to get through that. And then, you know, set out the ambition that in 5 years' time or 1 year's time, 2 years' time, when we've cleared that backlog, this will be what the justice system will look like. The same, you could have the emergency for asylum hotels if you willed it into existence. And it just seems to me that the government seems just so, like, again, that rabbit in the headlights kind of thing. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. I can't do anything.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to not a much jollier subject. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Sorry, guys. Tom, talk to us about your decision to commission our deputy editor, Will Lloyd, to write his brilliant cover story about why the monarchy should fall after the whole Andrew scandal blew up.
Yeah, God, that was a week. It's part of the tradition, isn't it, of the left in Britain that it almost seems forgotten now. But there has been a Republican, not just a legitimate, but a kind of noble republicanism, radicalism, that and an alternative story about what it is to be English or British, that is based in a sort of radical constitutionalism. That has been a core part. If you go back to Foote and these guys, sort of, or Anthony Barnett, who wrote who was interviewed by our previous editor Jason Cowley for the New Statesman. He was a big part of this, a kind of constitutional radicalism about devolution, about the very state of Britain, the sense of it being kind of anachronistic, gone, and that we've just, for so long, we just kind of come to accept it. Just accept that this is ludicrous, and then Andrew comes along and kind of reminds us of this.
Yeah,
and the fact that once you start to discuss it in a room, so the three of us have probably been up there when we were discussing this. This was something that has been known about, that there's been a payoff to this woman who's gone through this appalling situation. This money that's gone out of Britain to pay this, and then he's still there. Why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we so enraged about this? And Will, who writes brilliantly on the monarchy, is sort of talking about this, and he gets going, and I think he says, it's time for him to go. And I said, well, you should write that,
Yeah.
But the polemic is should be a part of the New Statesman tradition, and so I commissioned it, and then he panicked, and then went off for a week.
And then he was sent to the Tower, and we never saw him again.
Yes, exactly. I think he's still there.
Rachel, you actually read Virginia Giuffre's book and wrote a very great piece about it. From reading that and what she wrote about Andrew, do you think that this was high time as a sort of turning point for the royal family, or how Britain's relationship with the royal family should be?
It was interesting because, as Tom said, we knew about all of this beforehand, but it was the publication after her death of this memoir that reignited it all. And first he said that he was voluntarily not going to use his titles, and then obviously the sort of British public were like, wait, so your punishment is deciding that you won't call yourself Duke of
changing your
whatever
notepaper.
And then there was the more radical step of formally stripping him of the title of Prince that was King Charles's decision. I keep wanting to call him Prince Charles, but no, time has in fact passed. And just to go back to the previous conversation, the interesting thing there was that the government didn't do anything. And actually it is in Parliament's control to pass laws taking away titles. We talked about that at the time, that has happened in the past where Parliament has acted in that way, and the government could...
And worse.
Indeed.
The good old days.
I don't think anyone was suggesting that level of punishment for Andrew. But actually, we live in a parliamentary democracy. The government and Parliament could have acted and didn't. And the line coming out from Number 10 was, this is a matter for the royal family. We're not going to get involved.
Or they don't want to waste parliamentary time.
Why aren't you going to get involved? So in the end, it fell to the royal family itself, and vast majority of the public believe it was the right decision. Also, majority of the public think that the royal family or King Charles acted too slowly on that. So I think real widespread public horror and disgust. I think at the levels of privilege that this individual was still being afforded that were in no way earned or justified. But more generally on the book, the Prince Andrew passages of the book are, they're very significant for a British audience, but it's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the Epstein case overall, which continues.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because that was my last question on this, which is, Jeffrey Epstein's web continues to unravel and implicates more and more figures of authority with it. Obviously, we've had Andrew, Peter Mandelson, we mentioned earlier in the podcast. Is there still a vulnerability for Donald Trump there? And is there anyone else you think can be brought down? Or
the honest answer is there anyone else, is that we just don't know, because so much of the information, and we're talking about decades of federal cases, state cases, information that's being gathered, numerous civil trials that are sealed at the moment. So the Epstein files, this kind of massive data that we have, and every time we get a little bit of it, there's so much of it that sort of going through it and trying to work out who's implicated. I think the straightforward answer is yes, I'm sure there are other high-profile individuals who could be brought down by this. So far, we don't know who they are because they haven't been, those trials haven't happened. One thing that Andrew could do if he wanted to show that he actually is serious about, righting past wrongs and doing something to sort of make amends for the victims, whatever, he could go to the US and testify, which he's been very, very reluctant to do. I don't know about the Trump side of things. What I do know is that the Epstein files have split the MAGA movement.
Yeah.
There are the kind of Trump diehards who have supported him sealing it and not releasing them. And then there are the kind of MAGA sort of core believers who are like, we voted for you so that you would release the files about this conspiracy. And he's released some of them now. Honestly, who knows? I just think, I don't think this is going to be the thing that brings down Donald Trump, but it could bring down others.
So we're going to move on to the big international talking points of this year. We were never going to get through this episode without mentioning the Trump word. We already have. So back in February, Donald Trump imposed tariffs on goods arriving into the US from countries around the world. Tell us a bit about what these tariffs entailed. Why did he go for them, Tom?
Look, I think one thing to understand about Donald Trump is if you go back and watch him in the 1980s, he's saying pretty much the same things about tariffs and how America's idiotic leaders have let them down and they're being played by all these other countries and they're losing their manufacturing, they're losing their businesses. And there's a video, I think it's in the kind of late 1980s, I think it's like 89, something like that. And his big enemy at the time is Japan. And it coincides with books that were released at the time, top bestsellers that were saying Japan is going to overtake the United States and it will be the global superpower, and and we are subsidizing it. We're paying for its defense. We're paying for its nuclear weapons, and they're ripping us off. And of course, Japan then entered a 30-year slowdown in which it hasn't recovered. I think it now has GDP per capita about the same as Poland. Extraordinary. But but anyway, it's still very nice to go to, I'm told. But he has just essentially changed the sort of the focus of his ire from Japan to China, understandably, and towards the European Union.
Yeah.
So I think there is a consistency about Donald Trump, even amid the chaos, that he genuinely is a free trade skeptic. We should also realize that this is not completely unique about American presidents. This is in some senses, you could argue that actually a period of free trade globalization is the outlier here. The American economy is so vast, it has so many natural resources on which it can depend, unlike Western Europe, that it can, in a sense, afford to be protectionist, and it can benefit the US economy in certain ways or crush its enemies. So I would say there's two things: consistency of Donald Trump's belief in tariffs and a kind of return to a traditional American foreign policy of not quite isolationism, but reluctance to get involved outside of the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how is it proving, Rachel? Is it playing out there in the way that lots of people warned? I remember there were warnings about prices going up and that being contradictory to Donald Trump's victory, which was supposed to be, about the cost of living.
Well, prices have gone up.
Yeah.
So that objectively has happened. And social media is not data. But if you ever want to, cheer yourself up with some schadenfreude, the Reddit threads of Trump MAGA supporters who backed the tariffs because they believed that the other countries would be paying the import duties, who then look at something that they have bought from another country and go, wait, why am I paying the tax? Wasn't it meant to be them? So I think, there is widespread misunderstanding about what tariffs actually are and who pays them. And certain sectors of the US economy have been very badly hit by retaliatory tariffs. Yeah. So I think Trump has announced a $12 billion economic assistance program for farmers because China just stopped buying American soybeans. I think the missing piece of information from the very comprehensive analysis that Tom outlined just then is that China is also vast and diverse in its natural resources and its manufacturing capabilities, and capable of going, okay, you want to play the protectionist game, we'll play it too. And that's why Trump has backed down on Chinese tariffs. I mean, China was like the focus of his anger at the unfair global trade playing field, whereas countries like the UK, where we're not big and diverse enough to be able to do everything. We kind of rely on globalization and importing the things that we need and exporting the things that we do well. We're much more vulnerable. We can't just say, okay, we're going to grow all our own food ourselves or whatever, because we just can't. Actually, the UK not as badly hit as other countries. There was the 2nd of April was quote unquote Liberation Day, where all countries were going to get hit with a default 10% tariff, including.
I feel so free.
Including an island off the coast of Australia that I think is only inhabited by penguins, and then other countries that
just picturing them like picking up tins in the little penguin corner shop, being like, "What? What did the penguins ever do to you?"
So Britain fared, supposedly well. The EU got hit by 15% tariffs. But again, like we kept hearing how we have a special relationship with the US, and we have our trading relationship is such that we buy more goods from them than they buy from us. So theoretically, we're on the good step, we're on the positive side of the ledger, and we still got hit with this 10% tariff. Yeah. So I think some of it is about US protectionism and self-sufficiency, and some of it is just about bullying countries where America can, because it's big and we're small, and that is what we saw.
Yeah, and we did have Trump's state visit this year, and something that's often put on the positive side of the ledger for Keir Starmer is that he's managed that relationship with Donald Trump quite well, or better than some of his critics warned before Labour came into government if they had potentially been facing a Trump-led White House. Tom, what do you think of that analysis?
Yeah, I mean, it's true, but it only takes you so far, because, I mean, we hear this a lot, don't we, of like failing domestic prime ministers, and they go, but he's very well respected on the world stage. Look what Boris Johnson did for Ukraine, or look at Rishi Sunak or Theresa May, whatever. But it's not that hard in a sense, because what are you doing? What is the great difference of opinion in British politics about Ukraine, or about trying to get the best possible deal from the United States that we can? There isn't that much. The differences of opinion are on questions of sovereignty to do with the EU, which is still a dividing line in British politics, and the ECHR, right? But on the other things, there's very little disagreement. So it's easier to look like a statesman. Being a statesman is about sort of, politics stops at the border, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
Which of course
You're more
it doesn't.
of a diplomat than a.
Yeah. So I'm only sympathetic up to a point on that, to be honest.
Rachel, what do you think of that? With the state visit, some people said that Britain played a blinder. Others said it was a bit of a humiliating spectacle.
I think it is actually in everyone's interest that whoever is the UK Prime Minister doesn't go out of their way to antagonise the US until we have worked out how to be more dependent than we are, whether that's in a closer relationship with Europe or not. And I think that there is a lot of criticism that Keir Starmer gets for being soft on Trump. He gets it from Ed Davey, he gets it from the Greens, he gets it from the left of his party. You kind of want somebody who is pragmatic in that respect. But the Trump situation is just so volatile and unpredictable that it's very difficult to work out what any Western leader can do other than just try and keep things mostly stable, and every so often just call up Trump and remind him that Russia's still really bad and that Ukraine didn't start that war, and just remind him that historically US and the European countries have quite strong diplomatic links, and you might not want to wreck that just because your vice president has a vendetta. Just these sort of slow nudges. You actually saw that with some comments from Starmer in the last couple of weeks on Trump's latest re-pivot towards Russia and the Ukraine thing, so this peace plan that doesn't have anything in it that Ukraine would ever sign up to, and that just takes all the Moscow talking points. And Starmer was something very diplomatic that was something like, we're only able to be in this space because of the excellent work that President Trump has done to get us here. Kind of a reminder, like a little bit of flattery, a little bit of triggering the attention span. This is
yeah,
really
a little bit of
energy.
this is where you stood.
This is where you stood, and we all said you were great when you did that. So I can't really imagine actually anyone who might take over from Starmer handling it better or even that differently, to be honest.
Because we can't, right?
Yeah.
Can we? Because we've got about 80,000 troops left in the army. We're broke. We can't. We cannot step into America's shoes.
We've got 7 frigates, I think.
Yeah, we like
7.
we say to Trump, we fly over, and all of the European leaders like sit in a horseshoe around him and sort of like plead with him not to leave because we can't step into the breach. It's like it is humiliating. Like an economy or a populate this a block, an area of the world the size of Western Europe, has found itself in a position where it is completely dependent on the United States. It is an absurd position. I do wonder how long in British politics it will be before there is a kind of anti-American sentiment that is more mainstream than it is today. Like, I think it's a fascinating sort of question why we never had a kind of anti-American conservatism in Britain. You know, you cross over the Channel to France and it's mainstream there. And there is a sense that we shouldn't be dependent on the United States, that we should have a kind of self-reliance. If we can, we should invest in our own technologies, our own military. And it's never really been a thing here. And if you think of, Farage, he would take us closer to the United States, clearly, on almost every aspect. Tech regulation, interoperability with the US military, so we're buying American kit, so we're more dependent on them, energy relationships and all the rest.
Food standards.
Food standards, the whole shebang. So we'd be moving much closer to them, and that would be a very different future. But Starmer is trying to hold the line, right? He's trying to hold the line between Europe and the United States. So he is taking us towards the US on tech regulation, but towards the European Union on food standards. And he's trying to get the best of both worlds. Where is the idea of a kind of Euro-Gaullism? A kind of sense that, no, we go in with Europe because together we could be in a less humiliating position. That we could have some sense of global power, of the kind that Macron talks about. Macron was this figure, this great sort of liberal hope of Europe. Where's that figure in British politics? I know Tony Blair adores Macron and sort of sees him as the second coming of himself, but sort of why isn't that expression has ever found a voice here? I think it's an interesting one, even on the sort of Remainer side of British politics. I don't think you ever hear that really. What they say is that we had a perfect sweet spot where we're inside the EU but outside the Euro. We didn't have to choose. It's not like, no, let's go all in. The only prime ministers who ever have done that is Edward Heath. And he rejected the special relationship for a period of time until he was forced to accept it a bit. But he tried to. So I always think there's a sort of this pivot moment of history that Edward Heath is the most radical prime minister we had, not Margaret Thatcher.
That's interesting. And speaking of Donald Trump, in September, the US brokered a deal in an attempt to end the war in Gaza. But since then, 2 months on, after this supposed deal came into effect, both sides continue to accuse each other of violations on an almost daily basis. And Netanyahu says the second phase of the plan is now close, that Israel should withdraw its troops further from Gaza, Hamas should disarm. How likely has that happened? How close are we actually to that?
Well, the thing about phase 2 is that it is so much more complicated than phase 1. And that's not to underplay the achievement of phase 1, ceasefire, return of the hostages, release of Palestinian prisoners. But phase 2 is who's going to run Gaza, who's going to rebuild Gaza, who's going to pay to rebuild Gaza, who is going to police Gaza, who is going to make sure that Hamas disarm. Are Hamas going to have a say in that process? Israel say absolutely not. Hamas say they won't lay down their weapons under those circumstances. The idea that there was going to be, what do they call it, international stabilising force of troops from other countries, Pakistan, Indonesia, Turkey, policing Gaza on behalf of Israel, so the Israeli military can retreat, but so that Hamas doesn't end up policing the region in the most authoritarian way possible, which we saw in the days after the ceasefire, those killings. How is that going to work? Are those countries actually going to provide troops? I mean, they've said that they might be open to maybe talking about it. Can you ever see a situation where the Israeli government outsources its own defence to troops of other nations? How does the Palestinian Authority get revamped in a way that has democratic legitimacy, but not any of the people who were involved? There are just so many questions and so many points. And if you look at what the peace plan actually says on all of these issues, like who's going to pay for it, who's going to provide it, how is it all going to work, the answer is we're going to talk about it. We're going to reform it. We're going to have a conversation and get everyone involved. Maybe Tony Blair will be involved. Maybe Tony Blair won't be involved. The only person on this board of peace confirmed, I think, is Donald Trump.
Right.
The balance between Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian people that the Israelis will accept, people that the surrounding countries will... it's very difficult to see that exact sweet spot where everyone feels that they're getting a peace process that is sustainable and not likely to collapse and disintegrate into further fighting as soon as one minor thing seems to go wrong. And there's a lot of non-minor things that are already kind of unravelling it around the edges. So I think the achievement of the ceasefire is great, but in terms of are we closer to a lasting, sustainable peace? No, we're closer to this halfway house, open-ended, don't rock the boat, we're not really sure what's going on, but let's try and keep it as it is because escalation is worse situation.
Yeah, and without those guardrails there, do you just end up with this sort of Donald Trump real estate deal dream type thing with the Gulf states, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, do you remember that original plan when it came out?
Gaza Riviera.
Yeah. I mean, this is why it's always so hard to read Trump, isn't it? And from the beginning of this second term in particular, that sense of this sort of the extreme claim, and that you can't quite judge how real he means it, or whether he doesn't care whether he means it or not. It's sort of testing, shocking, provoking into some form of movement that can arrive at a deal. I mean, we should say he's talked about annexing Canada. He talked about annexing Greenland. I don't think he's quite given up on that yet. He's currently effectively at war with Venezuela. He launched a bomb attack directly from US soil on Iran. These are massive moves that have taken place. You look back at the Gaza peace deal, and as you say, it's obviously a good thing that we have a ceasefire or a peace agreement of some form rather than what was happening. But we arrived there because it was allowed to go on to the extent that it went on to. So the sort of the Gaza in complete ruins, essentially, and so we're kind of grabbing some tiny bit of hope from amid this sort of awful situation. And so we are being asked to kind of trust in Trump that he will fix this from this position. And I'm not particularly hopeful myself that is going to be the case, or that is a wise thing to do, to put all of our trust in Trump that he's going to get it done. And going back to the point about Europe before, you just think Europe's voice in this is almost nothing, is it? We're talking about Turkish troops and Pakistani troops. We don't talk about Europe at all in this, really. We had that moment where we recognised the Palestinian state, and so did the French. I think there is some talk in Whitehall that this helped the process. It's hard to look at it, though, big picture, and think that we played much of a part at all.
No, and Freddie Hayward, our US correspondent, made the point in his cover story on this that it was actually sort of figures outside of the Whitehall machine who were most instrumental, if we were to influence Trump at all, in influencing Trump, like Tony Blair. And lastly, on this topic, obviously this has been a tragedy for Gazans, still is. It's a hugely traumatic moment for a lot of diaspora communities in particular across the West as well, particularly Muslims, and has shaped politics in its way. Do you think that's likely to recede a bit as if we are putting our trust in Trump to try and stabilise that region, and if that does come to pass, do you think that means that this kind of falls away from how it's been shaping British politics over the past few years?
No.
Oh yeah, I agree with Rachel.
It's going to get more extreme. Not extreme. It's going to get more heated and I think electorally significant.
Really?
We had the election of the 6 independent pro-Gaza MPs in the last election. I think just what that showed is, go back to the fracturing of the electoral landscape, is that there is space for that in British politics. And if you look at how vulnerable Labour are in various parts of the country, it's hard not to see that as the beginnings of a trend that will continue.
I agree with you. I think it strikes me as a bit of an Iraq war effect, where there's going to be certain groups of people, whether that's, working class Muslim voters who used to vote Labour, or whether it's, liberal metropolitan graduates in city seats who are never going to forgive Labour for what they feel as not having been robust enough on this subject.
But it has an effect the other way as well, which we should look into.
Yeah.
At the New Statesman, because I was speaking to one minister the other day who was talking about how uncomfortable it made them feel, because in one sense he knew that there were Muslim voters who just won't vote for him again.
Yeah.
But he also knew that there were other minority groups in his constituency that would now and hadn't before.
As a result directly of how they saw Labour approach
the
Gaza issue?
No, they will vote for people who the Muslim voters are voting against.
Oh, I see.
They will vote to keep
literally along sort of
ethnic,
sectarian
lines.
Or they'll vote
Interesting.
to keep out the Muslim candidate.
Yes, yeah. And so that may be, in some seats, a Reform candidate. It may, in some seats, be a Conservative, or it may, in some cases, be a Labour MP. And that is the sectarian nature of British politics.
Yeah.
We have seen bits of it before, right? Do you remember that time Modi came over?
I was just going to mention that.
And and there was a big push from the Conservative Party to win Hindu voters, and it happens successful, yeah. And it happens in the United States as well. I think Modi went and addressed a rally with Trump in Texas, and the Indian diaspora in the US voting Republican now.
Yeah.
It's hard to judge, isn't it, from here? But I think that is quite a scary prospect, looking at it down the line. That if British politics starts to divide along ethnic lines in that way, maybe listeners may get in touch and say that it already has in some.
Well, yeah, you saw the riots in Leicester and.
Yes.
Yeah, those moments.
But that will have. I do think the sort of the impact that will have outside of these particular seats on the consciousness of the nation, the different groups, different parts of the nation, and how they react, is such an important part of British politics now that we need to sort of be watching carefully.
And just the last international story I want to pick over with you two before we let our listeners back to their betwixtmas, or whatever you call the period that they're listening to us in. We had a new pope this year. For listeners who might not remember, back in April, Donald Trump said his number one choice for the next pope would be, of course, himself. But the role went to Robert Prevost, now known as Pope Leo XIV. What made this pope unusual, Rachel? What distinguished him from Pope Francis?
So, what made him unusual? He's the first American pope.
Yeah.
Which is pretty significant. He comes from Chicago. And one of the things that we've seen in his first few months, and I was going to say in office. Are you in office if you're in popedom?
In Popemobile.
He is one of the few people who, the few world leaders, because the Pope is a world leader, who has openly spoken against Donald Trump, not by name, but
no, that's true.
His big themes are that the Catholic Church should be really focusing on fighting poverty. He has spoken about being compassionate with immigration and refugees.
He's questioned the pro-life policies of the US administration.
He said
he blessed a block of ice in Greenland to draw attention to
climate change,
melting glaciers.
And I actually think Finn McRedmond's piece on the New Statesman, when he was first appointed, again I don't know what the terminology is, when he first became sanctified, was really interesting.
God, we're so irreligious.
None of us are Catholic. Are you Catholic?
No, I'm not. But can you have Catholic heritage? Got back there somewhere.
Okay.
All right, good. You've saved us all.
But
her
piece was pointing out that he was wearing the full Pope regalia, the red and the gold and the stuff that Pope Francis had put to one side and dressed in a very different way. So he looked like a traditional...
he looked like a Pope Benedict.
Yeah, he looked like Pope Benedict.
Yeah.
And yet what he was saying, both then and even more so since then, is very much a continuation of the Pope Francis school of what modern Catholicism should be. It's really upset a lot of American conservatives. He's more cautious. He speaks in a more moderate way. He's not quite as radical in demeanour and vibes as Pope Francis was, but it's very much a continuation of, if you really care about Catholicism, if you really believe in the Bible and believe in the Catholic view of God, then your priorities should be climate change, compassion, helping the poor.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus would have done, and not worrying so much about divorce and gay marriage and abortion.
Yeah, I do wonder whether, because people talk about sort of the Vatican on this woke journey.
Woke Pope.
Yeah, woke Pope. But I do wonder whether the shift is actually just a move away from the West, because you had Pope Francis, who was the first non-European Pope for, 1,000 years or something. And then you have Pope Leo, who is from North America, but he's a Peruvian citizen. He served in Peru. And Catholicism is dwindling in Europe, and it's rising in Africa, Asia, Latin America. I wonder if it just reflects sort of a change in where people actually care about Catholicism. Yeah,
although both of those non-European popes, are quite European as well, aren't they? And there's sort of the... he was of Italian origin, wasn't he, Francis, I think? And I just have two thoughts on Pope Leo. I found myself being more moved by him than I thought. And I have tried to think about why. And one is, I think just having a pope whose first language is English and just listening to a pope speak in a way that's suddenly just so immediate and not... I know it's foreign in that he's American, but it doesn't feel as foreign. It just feels, okay, I understand every intonation, exactly what you mean. It feels more kind of close to home in a sense. And then my son is called Leo, so so when the announcement came through, it's like, that's nice. You've been beatified.
Yeah. Oh well, that's a validation of your name choice, Tom.
I didn't realise.
Well, let's see how the papacy plays out under Pope Leo.
It also made us all go and watch Conclave.
True, yeah, that's true too.
Film.
Which was an excellently timed film as well.
A film that is all about a whole lot of men in a room talking. That's excellent film, but brilliantly done.
Sounds like life in the lobby, Rachel.
Yes.
Ouch.